going to do some shading on this bunny. Now, when you are shading, you need to consider your light source. I've put some examples of human faces that can easily be translated to the bunny's face of how light would reflect off the surface of the face. And you can see in each of these, there's a light source coming from a different direction. For instance, the light's hitting this face on the very close edge here, and then it's all in dark. This is from the front. This is from the lower bottom, right? This is from the side here. This is from the side. So wherever it's lightest, that's the direction the light is coming from. So you want to carefully decide where you're going to have your light coming from, and then you'll want to use some sort of reference for where to place the shadows and the highlights. Now, when we are shading, it is best to close any layers or groups that you don't need. And I start my shading right with my fur layer. I create that layer above, create clipping mask, and I'm going to name this fur shading. Okay, so now that I have my shading layer set up, I'm going to come over and I'm going to get my brush tool. I want to start light and soft, so it's hard, round, pressure, opacity. I'm going to up it. I'm going to turn the opacity way down, and I'm going to make sure my smoothing is off. I'm going to take this color, and I want to take a darker version, and since this is a tint of this blue, I'm going to go across the top, not down, and find a darker version of that blue, a more pure version. Now I'm going to turn the opacity down even more. And what I think is I want to have the light kind of hitting this side of the face. It'll catch the nose and the cheek here, and it'll be darker over here. I'm checking this out, and already I'm going to double check. I'm in hard round. I need soft round. So double check that you hit the right brush. Make sure it's the right size. That seems a little small. And the key is to just start placing that shading really light where you think it'll best suit. Now, the further away from the light, the darker the shading will get. So don't be afraid to get pretty dark. On one side, I can even make this a smaller and build up that shading along that edge even more. I'll zoom in so you guys can see. Okay, and what that's doing is changing value. So I'm going from dark to light across. However, I'm going to have some shading underneath the nose because the nose is going to cast a bit of a shadow here, okay, and around the edge. And again, go back, adjust your size, adjust your opacity. You're not going to get it right on the first side chance. We're just kind of setting down our basic shading. I might have a little bit of shading under the eye here and a little bit under the mouth. And then I might start to add in my highlight, or I might want to come in and erase to blend. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my highlight. I'm going to come to a very white color. So this was my original, so I'm going to come above it. And for this, I'm going to turn the opacity down even more because I don't want bright, bright highlights. I want them subtle. And I'm going to start to add a little bit of shading here. I'm going to hit that cheek. And what if she's a little bit sun-kissed? Don't be afraid to play with color. What if, like, right here, it's a little bit of heat that's hitting her? Like the light is a little bit stronger, giving her like kind of rosy glow. So you can think about the time of day, like around sunset, the light is softer, warmer, right? So you can play with color a little bit as you're adding your shading. Okay, how would that kind of hit the cheeks? Then I might come and grab this color again, turn this down, because I know like under the eye, turn the opacity up a little. It's going to be a little darker right there. So as you're building the shading, you're really thinking, okay, look at your guides, but like respond to, is it looking dimensional? Right? that's too much. I'm going to take that down. Going back and forth, I'm going to bring in that shading here. I'm going to turn the opacity down there. Now, the other thing you can do too is you can make a harder shadow for some areas. So I'm going to come to hard round pressure size. I'm going to turn the opacity way down, and I'm going to create a drop shadow here. And that's a harder shadow. I can also put those harder shadows along the hairline, right? As if there's like a harder cast shadow here. Now, because my opacity is turned up, it's getting a little too see-through. So I'm going to actually turn my opacity to 100 so that it's not translucent. And I really want to think about where this line is going. I know it looks really dark, but I'm going to show you a trick. Now, I made that in one line. It has to be one line. Otherwise, this doesn't work. I'm going to go to Edit, Fade Brush Tool, and I'm going to turn that down, way down to blend it in, okay? And I've got that harder line. I can put that, so you can turn the opacity down here, or you could fade it there, okay? And maybe I want like just a little bit of shading. Ooh, what if the eyelashes have a little bit of shading? So you want to think about like details. What if those eyelashes brought some shading with them? Who knows if this will look good, but try things out. And remember, we're going to blend this with the eraser too. So I'm getting that kind of shadow there, right? I think I'm going to turn it down here more. Seems a little harsh. So I'm going to go down and make it more shadowy. There we go. Okay. And I think I'm going to add a little bit of shading right there. So I've got soft shading. I've got harder shading. I can even go to my soft round pressure opacity and turn the hardness up. Just so in some areas if I want something in between. That's too much. All right, so before I get carried away, what I'm going to do now is come over to my brush. It's on my eraser brush. It's on soft round opacity, right? I'm going to turn it up to a good size. And wherever I think things need to just kind of be blended down, I'm going to start to make those blends. Okay, my opacity is at 33. I can turn it down for a softer blend. Right, coming over these areas maybe where they need to just blend in more. Play with your opacity. What's going to work in one area, you have to change in others. Okay, here, along here is the bridge of the nose. Do I need to bring more shading here? Maybe. I'm going to come back, turn my hardness down, and maybe bring in some shading along the edge here. Seems too harsh. I'm going to go back. I'm going to try maybe just a little bit of round shading there. And then I'm going to come back and maybe add in some pink highlight because I think the shading got a little bit too much there. And again, come to my brush and blend it in. And don't forget to kind of zoom out as you go. How's it looking from afar? I'm going to then take my brush and kind of blend some of that. It feels like that cheek is a little bit too dark, so I'm coming back in from afar too. Then I can work into the ears. Some areas you're going to want to just put a gradient on it. So I've went to my inner ear, and I'm going to create my clipping mask, shading inner ear. Okay. And I'm going to turn my paint bucket to my gradient. I'm going to pick up this color, come back to my gradient, and maybe I want to go more of a pink in there and see what happens. Ooh, I like it. And that pink is playing off that bow there. I need to fade it, so I'm going to go to Edit, Fade Gradient, and just make that one. It was too close to the bow color, so I'm just going to fix that there. Right, and then I'm going to come back to my fur shading, and I really need to think about this color here. So like how the shading is going to hit that ear, it's going to be bright here. So I'm going to start to add that shadow along here. It's probably darker here, and it's going to be much darker right down here. Right, there's not a lot of light hitting the back end of that ear. But I need to blend a little bit. It's got a little harsh there. Blend it out. And I want to pull a highlight. So I'm going to come back to this pink color, and I'm going to change my brush to that hard pressure size, turn it down. I have my opacity down, and I might just add a little highlight there, like so. Just catch that light. And I might want it a little stronger, so I'm going to go a little lighter. Can always fade it in with either fade up here, turn that opacity down, or I could do lighten and see what happens. Until I get what I want. And I'm going to go back to normal mode. All right. So I could keep shading, right? This ear is going to be lighter here, darker on this side. And I'm just going to keep using these techniques on the head and face. And this tutorial is really about how do we shade the head, how do we shade the face. I will do another tutorial on clothing and the body. The shading on the body will be very similar, but the clothing might be different. Same with the hair. Hair, I suggest you have fun. We can quickly come over to hair and kind of take a look at it. So hair, first of all, if you don't like the color of something, change it. I'm not loving this hair. So first I'm going to come over to hair, and I'm going to pick up this color. I've got these little problems, so I'm going to see if I can fix them. Oops, need a harder brush. So let me just get these fixed, and maybe I'll like it better once this little bit of mistake is picked up. Okay, ooh. Pick that up, come over here, fill that in. Be careful not to go outside the lines. Okay, so with the hair, now I'm going to make my clipping mask, hair shading. I'm going to play with the gradient. I want to add some more. This is really orange, so I'm hesitant to go. Maybe I'm going to add some blue. Think about complementary colors, like a lightish gray blue against this color. Will it look interesting? Oh, maybe. Well, I got another one of those green lines I got to be aware of. I'm going to turn that down. No, I don't like it there. But maybe just on this side alone, maybe a little bit there. Don't love it. So again, coming back. I gotta clean up this mess here too. So as you're going, don't be afraid to fix those mistakes. Maybe it's gonna be lighter, like blonde. Okay, that's better. And then maybe, because some light's gonna hit there. And with the hair, you can be kind of liberal and fun with its use. Color in that, oops. There we go. So that's more interesting. And then with the hair, then you can make another layer, create clipping mask, and this can become hair texture. And that's when you can start to really experiment with brushes and blending some texture into the hair. So pastel texture, maybe I'm going to come down to a darker color. I want to turn the opacity down. And I'm going to start to bring in some line work. Right? How did those lines curve with the hair? Okay. here. Ooh, don't like that. I'll leave maybe this for later, but let's see. Okay, and then I would have the option of taking my eraser brush and maybe coming over it with a really low opacity to blend it in more. Okay, making it more subtle, or I could always turn the opacity on the layer down too. Okay, so really experimenting with texture in hair. And then in the next tutorial, we'll talk a little bit more about drop shadows, but for the bow. Okay, the bow, I want to just do some classic drop shadow. So create clipping mask, bow shading. And I suggest this for clothing. And I'm going to pick up this color and then find the darker shade of it. And I'm going to come back to my kind of like default hard round pressure size because I don't necessarily want to have texture here. Make it smaller, turn my opacity down. And I'm thinking about like, you know, this is going to be lighter, it's going to get darker, maybe underneath and around the edges. I'm going to go up in opacity because I don't like the overlay look. I'm going to bring my opacity all the way up and then I'll turn it down later. I'm going to make this side of the bow darker because the light's coming from here. Okay, but this is higher up, so it's going to be darker towards the center because the light will catch this top area. So keep thinking about, like, imagine, like, where would the light hit? If you're not sure, ask me. I will help you problem solve. Okay, and we'll probably put a little bit of shading right there. Building up. This drop shadow, this harder shading is really good for elements like clothes. You don't want your shading to be the same everywhere because then everything would be like the same texture as the fur. That doesn't make sense. Okay. Then I'm going to go up. I'm going to just fade the layer in the opacity, right? So it's not quite so harsh. And there we have a good example of contrast.